An Islamic State suicide bomber killed 30 civilians in a Kabul mosque Monday. Shia Muslim worshippers were observing one of the holiest days in their religious calendar. The bombing fits a pattern of attacks on Afghanistan's Shia Muslim minority in recent months. In July, the Islamic State took credit for another suicide bombing that killed 80 people during a protest in Kabul. The United States is still involved in Afghanistan after 15 years of ongoing conflict. There are questions around how and if the United States will maintain its involvement with Donald Trump as president. We go now to Lindsay in the studio with more on Afghanistan.
Thanks, Megan. Here to offer more insight about Afghanistan and Donald Trump's policy is Professor David Barno and Sean Carberry. Professor David Barno is a retired three-star Army general and former commander of U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan from 2003 to 2005. He is currently a distinguished practitioner in residence in American University's School of International Service. Mr. Carberry is a reporter with Federal Computer Week, specializing in covering defense. He previously worked as NPR's Kabul bureau chief. Thank you both for joining us.
Great to be here.
So let's start out with talking about President-elect Donald Trump's plan for Afghanistan. In the past, President Trump has said that involvement in Afghanistan was a mistake. Let's take a look at that clip right now.
We've wasted billions and billions of dollars, and more importantly, thousands and thousands of lives, not to mention all of these young men and women that come home and they really have problems. Let's go, let's get with it. We need leaders that know what they're doing. And now we have Afghanistan, where a man loses his mind and goes around on a killing spree, and the world hates us for it. What is going on?
So basically in that video, Donald Trump was saying that he really doesn't agree with U.S. action in Afghanistan. But before we talk about that, I just want to roll one more tape where he retracted that statement. So let's take a look at that right now.
I do not think it was a mistake to go into Afghanistan after 9/11, because you did say on our air, and let me just read to you what you said on October 6th about Afghanistan. You said we made a terrible mistake getting involved there in the first place. We had real brilliant thinkers that didn't know what the hell they were doing, and it's a mess.
We made a mistake going into Iraq. I've never said we made a mistake going into Afghanistan.
Our question was about Afghanistan. That day on October 6th, it was about Afghanistan.
Okay, wouldn't matter. I never said it. Afghanistan is a different kettle. Afghanistan is next to Pakistan. It's an entry in. You have to be careful with the nuclear weapons.
So obviously there's a lot of confusion about what Donald Trump wants to do in Afghanistan. So basically, what are your best guesses in how Trump will actually handle Afghanistan moving forward? And what is his plan? Let's start with you, Professor Barno.
Well, I think everyone's questioning what exactly is going to happen next. Some of that may be determined based on who he chooses to be as Secretary of Defense, his next Secretary of State. He's already chosen a National Security Advisor, retired Lieutenant General Mike Flynn. I think of all the candidates I hear discussed, however, all of them that I know would propose doing as much or more in Afghanistan than we do today. So I think, despite some of the confusion during the campaign rhetoric, as they assess the importance of Afghanistan, we have about 9,800 American troops there now. I think most of those professionals will judge that we need to at least maintain that commitment, if not increase it slightly, to ensure it doesn't become a base again for terror attacks in the region or against the United States.
And what about you? What do you think?
Well, his initial quote criticizing Afghanistan was expressing what's a very sort of populist kind of sentiment about it. A lot of Americans struggling to understand what's being accomplished with all the investment that's gone on there. Certainly, though, politically inside Washington, there's a lot of pressure to still keep the investment in Afghanistan and make as much out of it as is possible. The real question, and one of the things that I've been asking people for the last year and a half, is there a serious discussion going on in Washington about what can be achieved there? What are realistic goals, and how do you set strategy to achieve those goals? And that's what's been missing by a lot of people's estimation. A lot of the goals have been beyond what can be achieved given international resources and the Afghan people. So the real question for President-elect Trump is he going to reevaluate the entire strategy and set of goals and change that, or continue to just put more into what's been going on over the last few years?
Right. And to follow up on that, Mr. Carberry, what would, in your opinion, these goals look like? What are the best goals that the United States should be setting to have better involvement in Afghanistan?
Well, one of the problems is a lot of the goals initially were about bringing stability, democracy, liberating women, things like that, which are aspirational goals that when people got on the ground realized are going to take generations to implement. So the question is, what are the primary goals? That Afghanistan should not be a haven for terrorists that threaten the U.S. and its interests. That's the top order. The question is, beyond that, what can be achieved? And when you had 140,000 international troops in Afghanistan, they still couldn't bring peace and stability. So with 8,400 troops there, what can be achieved? So again, that's still the question that's hanging there, is what are these goals, how can they be achieved, and do the resources match the goals?
Mm-hmm. So you both have emphasized how there needs to be more involvement in Afghanistan from U.S. forces, is that correct?
Well, I think we may differ a bit on that, but I fully agree that we need to think about what is the strategy and what are the goals we're trying to achieve first. We clearly haven't been able to achieve any kind of a sustained settlement or conclusion of that conflict in the last 15 years. And the Taliban have proved remarkably resilient, in part because they have a safe haven, most would argue, in Pakistan, outside of the country of Afghanistan. Our ability to control that and to impact them there is very limited. So that is unlikely to change. Given that, how do we do what we can to ensure that the government in Kabul doesn't fall, that the nation at least remains as stable as it is today, the Taliban don't increase their hold on any greater portions of the country, and we don't see it become perhaps a place where ISIS falls back to when they're pushed out of other parts of the region.
And so President Obama has actually planned to see 8,400 troops pulling out of Afghanistan. Do you think Trump will try to continue this exit strategy? Is that a good idea?
I think that President Obama paused that, obviously, even though the plan was to go to about half that here this year. And he recognized that if he were to do so, chances are the Taliban would move even more quickly to close in on the capital in Kabul. So I think it's likely that President-elect Trump will revisit that with his national security advisors, with his Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and see what the best course is for the road ahead to ensure Afghanistan's current situation doesn't worsen in the next 6 or 12 months.
Right. And so you kind of mentioned how this will really depend on who Trump picks as Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State. So there's speculation that Trump will appoint retired General James Mattis as Defense Secretary. So from 2010 to 2013, General Mattis headed the U.S. Military Central Command, giving him responsibility of all U.S. forces in the Middle East. And yesterday, Trump praised Mattis on Twitter, saying that General James Mad Dog Mattis, who is being considered for Secretary of Defense, was very impressive yesterday, a true general's general. So what might General Mattis propose in regard to Afghanistan, and what influence might he have on Trump's plan if he is indeed chosen to be Secretary of Defense? We can start with you, Mr. Carberry.
Well, again, one of the questions is there going to be a reevaluation of the broader strategic framework and the goals? Certainly, when you hear from a lot of people who have spent time on the ground there is a feeling that things are fragile, pulling back is going to increase the fragility and potential for collapse. So certainly a likelihood of at least maintaining the existing presence. There's some who have been pushing for investing even more in Afghanistan, so it remains to be seen, but I would certainly expect status quo at a minimum and discussion of either prolonging the existing commitment or looking for ways to increase it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd only add to that, I don't think that Afghanistan will get looked at in isolation with the other challenges in the region. I think it'll be part of a broader strategic framework, as Sean pointed out, for the Middle East writ large. So what the U.S. chooses to do with its coalition partners in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan, other parts of the region that are under duress from ISIS, that'll all be looked at, I think, as one holistic package. And I suspect my take would be that the U.S. role and the NATO role, which also is there with several thousand troops, the role for both those sets of forces will probably increase, if anything. I doubt seriously that the choice will be simply to withdraw the forces that are there now. I think that would destabilize Afghanistan and provide another opportunity for terrorist groups such as ISIS to expand their hold on parts of the region.
And Trump's made some comments about NATO, just kind of questioning that relationship. Do you think that will play a role in the U.S. relationship with NATO forces in Afghanistan and other coalition forces?
Well, he's walked some of those more critical comments back in the last several weeks. So I think that the U.S.-NATO alliance is going to remain very strong, despite some of the rhetoric during the campaign from now President-elect Trump. And I think we'll be rebuilding some of those bases, but I also think the expectation will be that NATO will do more. They'll contribute more to defense from their individual countries and will play a larger role perhaps even in Afghanistan.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for both joining us. And so that was Professor Barno from American University's School of International Service and Mr. Carberry, defense reporter for Federal Computer Week.
Rhetoric throughout the campaign is creating uncertainty for the next 4 years in the realm of economic policy and foreign economic relations. Throughout the campaign, Donald Trump specifically spoke about relations with China and Mexico, going as far as saying he would reconsider U.S. presence within NAFTA. What else can the American people expect? Sarah Kravitz has more.
Throughout the campaign, President-elect Trump blamed poor trade deals for the loss of U.S. jobs and promised to renegotiate and even quit the 1994 North American Free Trade Agreement with Canada and Mexico. I sat down with Professor Robert Kahn, a senior fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations, and asked what type of policies the country may see based on President-elect Trump's rhetoric throughout the campaign.
I think the honest answer is that we don't know. There's tremendous uncertainty about what happens next because the president-elect made a number of contradictory statements in the campaign. On the one hand, he promised aggressive, immediate action against trading partners that he thought were acting unfairly, China and Mexico and the like, and including threatening very high tariffs. That would almost surely provoke immediate retaliation.
Based on Donald Trump's unpredictable nature and rhetoric on economic policy, I asked Professor Stephen Sylvia of the Department of Economics at American University what led Americans to vote for Donald Trump.
Kind of jobs that were around in a city like Buffalo just aren't there anymore. So that is the kind of frustration that led a lot of voters to vote for Donald Trump.
In recent weeks, President-elect Trump began to appoint members and advisors to his administration. In regards to economic policy and economic foreign relations, the real question on everyone's mind is, whose advice will he take? His inconsistency and lack of experience in elected office offers very little confidence in the direction America will take for the next 4 years. For District Wire News, I'm Sarah Kravitz.
Coming up after the break, will the Trump administration cut ties with America's friends across the pond? How will NATO move forward with a President Trump? Stick with us.